welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. Newsweek has spotlighted groundbreaking poet Victoria Chang as capable of writing the kind of poetry collection that creates a new genre, or perhaps even a reinvention of the form. A symphony, a manifesto, all of these above and then some. A world all its own, one that changes ours. And such praise has followed Chang around her entire career, starting 20 years ago when Writer's Digest reported that her first book, Circle, had won the Crab Orchard series in poetry, followed by her well-received second collection, Salvinia Molesta, in 2008, and then The Boss in 2013, which won a Penn Center USA Literary Award and a California Book Award. The School Library Journal would applaud the way, within the pages of her children's poetry collection, Love, Love, that Chang speaks to readers who quietly observe the world and reminds those who do not to look around and to be kind, thoughtful, heartbreaking, and honest, before calling it a must-purchase work for middle-grade shelves, and Is Mommy received similar accolades. Publishers Weekly declared that Barbie Chang was undoubtedly her most accomplished volume to date, and caught the attention of Interview magazine, who wrote that they had first encountered Chang's poetry with the publication of 2017's Barbie Chang, but like a lot of readers, what hooked her was the landmark series of lyrical obituaries, gathered in 2020's Obit, which hit like a bomb a few weeks into lockdown. Despite their highly particular elegies, mourning subjects like Chang's father's frontal lobe, his gait, her mother's logic, and language itself, the poems seem to hold a mirror to our collective terror and trauma in that period of uncertainty and global loss. Taking the world of poetry by storm, Time magazine mused that Victoria Chang captures this visceral, heart-stopping ache in Obit, while the Los Angeles Times admired stylistically that their form is innovative, a thin, short column down the middle of each page, playing off the traditions of the newspaper obituary. Winner of the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, the Penn Faulkner Award, and the Anisfield Wolf Book Prize. It was also a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Griffin Poetry Prize, and longlisted for the National Book Award. With the collection also named a New York Times Notable Book, a New York Times Best 100 Books of the Year, and a Time Magazine, National Public Radio, Boston Globe, and Publishers Weekly Best Book of the Year. NPR would then crown Dear Memory, Letters on Writing, Silence, and Grief as groundbreaking, wherein Chang's lyrical experiment memorably evokes an individual family's time capsule and an artist's timeless yearning to shape carbon dust into incandescent gem. And The Guardian, who featured her next collection, The Trees Witness Everything, as one of their best poetry books of 2022, celebrated her success in utilizing the waka, a Japanese syllabic form, where Chang takes the titles of poems by W.S. Merwin as a starting point for her own observations. The results are some of the most dazzling evocations of the natural world we've ever encountered. The Today Show would crown My Back to the World as a poignant, powerful collection that uses the work of American abstract painter Agnes Martin to tackle themes of grief, loss, and the loneliness of the human experience, yet also the hopefulness of the human experience as well. You'll find yourself underlining so many of Chang's beautiful verses, along with quietly smiling at her wit. And she joins us today to talk about it all. Victoria, welcome to the show.
Good morning.
You would stun the reading world with the arrival of Obit, inspiring the New Yorker to take a deep dive inside the remarkable story behind the writing of a book of poems written in the form of newspaper obituary. That the concept began after you tragically lost your mother to pulmonary fibrosis. 6 years before that, her father had a stroke, then slid into dementia. Chang observes the effect of these absences on language. The lost loved one is no longer a you. She's someone Chang can describe but can never again address. Obit accepts this transformation of grammar as generative poetic constraint. The obituary is defined by the remove of the third person, the brisk objectivity of someone writing about death on a deadline. The book is a catalog of losses, from the obviously traumatic, my mother, my father's frontal lobe, to the seemingly trivial, voicemail, similes. And Time magazine revealed as you began playing around with this therapeutic exercise on the page that although the author initially balked at writing an obituary, she soon found herself writing eulogies for the small losses that preceded and followed her mother's, each one an ode to her mother's life and influence. We understand this inspiration first came storming into your imagination during an especially inspired period of 2 weeks when you began drafting these poetic obituaries.
I think you just sort of deal with what life throws at you. And unfortunately, my father had a stroke when he was pretty young, and therefore I was, not super old either. And it struck our family pretty hard. But then my mother also had been ill, but it was sort of dormant. She had pulmonary fibrosis, and it's a terrible disease. It's when your lungs harden and you gradually suffocate to death. And when I say gradually, it can be very gradual. And so she became very ill when my father, needed a lot of help and just didn't understand anything. And so then she, when she passed away, it was really hard on me. And then I didn't want to write elegies because everyone else I felt like had done them better. And I just didn't feel like I wanted to do that. But one day I was listening to NPR and they were talking about that really cool documentary, Obit, which is all about obituary writers. And I don't know, just something clicked. And I have like an idea a minute, I just have that kind of brain that's constantly like turning and turning and very, I call it more of like an entrepreneurial brain. I recognize it when I see it. Like there are a lot of people who have this kind of brain, always thinking of new ideas, not on purpose. They just come. And this was just something that popped into my head at a stoplight. And then I went home and I wrote some poems because I thought, gosh, when my mother passed away, everything passed away. Like the whole world between her, she and I had this whole language between us. She and my sister had a different, like art, like a whole world shattered. And then I started writing, one thing died, then another thing died. I was thinking everything has died in some different ways. And that was based on the obituary, the shape, which didn't take the shape until later, but it was a way to start writing poems for my mother or to my mother. So I would say like, the bees died on, and that little prompt of following the obituary form helped me start to write and sort of start thinking about grief and instead of ignoring it. Yeah, I mean, it was so therapeutic when I was writing it. In fact, I was crying a lot when I was writing it. And I felt that was really healthy because I hadn't really kind of acknowledged the feelings that I was having. And I'm still sort of writing about grief and things because my father just passed away, recently. And so I think writing can be extremely helpful. And for someone like me who doesn't go to therapy and doesn't like to share information about myself or how I'm feeling, poetry has been the one place that I feel like I'm actually able to share. I can't share anywhere else, but I'm really comfortable sharing in poetry.
The Los Angeles Times, within their analysis of this groundbreaking work, would admire just how immersed you became in exploring the form on every corner of the page. Observing that in addition to memorializing her parents' declines, she's written obits for herself, for voicemail, sadness, appetite, and friendships. At intervals, the book includes tankas, a traditional Japanese poetic form often written by women, and a long sonnet-like series that stretches in fractured lines across the pages, a visual and textual counterpoint to the sharply confined obits. Where, from a purely technique point of view, do you feel like you expanded and pushed yourself into any new directions with this collection?
I aspire to put the best 5 words together in the order that I possibly can. Like I'm really focused on the writing and trying to make the writing interesting and new and fresh for me. And I have to satisfy myself.
After all that you bravely poured into this collection, the reaction beyond the round critical chorus of praise, in addition to the best books of the year list by Time Magazine, NPR, the New York Times, and Publishers Weekly, came with its wide embrace by readers, topped off with award acknowledgments of this collection's significance with highlights including winning the Los Angeles Times Book Prize and the Penn Volker Award. How does it feel to have your words touch so many readers that they garner this sort of acknowledgement?
Honestly, I was shocked that the book received the attention that it did. I'm, like not aspiring toward anything with like those things don't mean anything to me. If you give me something, I'll accept it graciously. I have to satisfy myself first. And so I'm not sitting around hoping I win this or hoping, and I never again, going back to when I first started, I mean, look at me. There was nobody that was writing poetry and publishing it at the time that I was starting. I could name like 2 poets, and there were more, but not a lot. And so I definitely think it was shocking to win all those awards. And actually, it was hard because I'm actually, I don't like people to look at me or to give me attention. I'm much better not on stage without lights. And it's not that I'm like super shy or anything, but I don't really feel comfortable with that kind of attention. But I accepted it graciously. And it was all online because it was during the pandemic. So I didn't have to get on a single stage, which was actually a blessing. And all the awards ceremonies were on Zoom. And actually, I felt like, oh, this is actually, I think this was sort of meant to be. But I'm still shocked at the reception that that book and any of my writing might have on anyone. Like sometimes people come up to me, they say the most unbelievable things to me, and I get the most unbelievable emails and notes and letters and things, and people cry to me. It's just really shocking to me that language can have that kind of power. So I don't think of it as like, oh, I'm so great, or it's like, to me, it's shocking and amazing and a reaffirmation of the power of words and the power of art, any art, to transform and to connect with other people.
When we then turn the proverbial page back to childhood, do you remember first finding yourself drawn to reading and writing poetry as much as any other genre or form of storytelling?
I grew up in the same time period that you did. So I grew up in the 80s and I loved watching cartoons and reading Archie comics and Mad Magazine. So those kinds of things were really in my consciousness. And I loved watching Scooby-Doo and Lost in Space and et cetera. And it was also the era of soap operas and the era of those big shows like Dallas and Knots Landing. So my mom used to watch all of them, and I just watched them with her. And I think I was never much of a like a long form storyteller, but I think that growing up in such a bone cold space called Michigan, I just was able to see nature more slowly. So everything just seemed like in the wintertime, everything just sort of stood still. And so I think that the more I kind of think about, the more I think my landscape played a large role in my sort of interest in poetry and the poetic image, because nothing's happening and you go outside and nothing's moving. But then if you kind of pay attention, there are all sorts of things moving, but they're moving just really slowly, like a smoke coming out of a chimney literally looks like a still life painting until you start paying attention. And so, yeah, that's, I think, to answer your question, that's sort of how I would answer that.
How do you remember any of that filtering down into early writing? Would you, for example, take walks deliberately looking for inspiration, or was it more serendipitous as a moment might hit you organically while outside on one of these expeditions?
Teachers, I mean, I think that I was lucky to go to a large public school system in West Bloomfield, Michigan, and there was a poetry program in our elementary school. And so I would have never known what poetry was otherwise. Maybe I would have intuitively known, but there's no way that I would have known if they didn't have the program and the teachers weren't teaching us how to write poems, and there weren't sort of these little contests and where everyone won first, second, or third place, or honorary or was it honorable mention? And they published all of our poems in these little pamphlets with the plastic spiral. Like if that didn't all exist, I wouldn't have never written a poem. Not that young for sure. So for me, it was all school, all the teachers that supported us. And this was all throughout like elementary school, middle school, and high school. So, I was in the same school system all the way through 12th grade. And in high school, I had two absolutely extraordinary English teachers, Ruth Lineweber, who has since passed, and James Corcoran, who taught all the lit classes. And he was like that classic English teacher that would wear tweed jackets and jeans and funky shoes and read us books aloud and back and just like pace back and forth in the front of the classroom. I loved those classes, and Ruth Lineweber made us memorize so many poems. I still kind of have them clicking in my head on a daily basis. A lot of Emily Dickinson. She had us reading Shakespeare. She was so cool and so passionate. So I think I would have never even continued liking poetry if it weren't for them.
Now, it's fair to say you have a wildly impressive academic track, beginning when you earned your bachelor's in Asian Studies at the University of Michigan, then attending Harvard University for your master's degree in the same topical arena, then with a stop at Stanford Business School for an MBA, before pivoting to studying the art form of poetry more formally via earning your MFA from the Warren Wilson College's Program for Writers on a prestigious Holden Scholarship. Who do you count as any mentors from this era that helped you more finely hone your voice as a poet on the page?
The cool thing about these low residency MFA programs like Warren Wilson, where I attended, they basically go back to that old model of one-on-one mentorship. So, you get to work a whole semester with one person and you exchange packets of poems and essays and things like that. So yeah, I had a great teacher there, many great teachers, but the one I remember the most is David Baker, who is a wonderful poet himself. And I just learned so much from him. And I mean, really, I wouldn't be here doing what I'm doing and have a love for language without these people. And so, I mean, when I teach, I hope to impart that kind of excitement about poetry onto other people as well.
Could you describe a bit about how your concepts connected to content within your first two published collections, Circle and Salvinia Molesta, and how you experienced their release?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, that was my first book of poems. And so you just start writing poems, and then you're stuck with a bunch of poems. And then you've got to figure out how to actually make them into something larger than a bag of poems, I guess. And so I I started thinking and looking at the poems from a different perspective and trying to see what might be something that connects them. And for me, it was ending up like this kind of image of a circle kind of forming. So with that book, it was that way, like as a first book, you were just writing poems in class kind of thing. I always thought it'd be kind of cool to have one book in the world because, a lot of writers don't believe that the work itself is complete until it meets the eyes of a reader in the case of if you're a writer or if you're a visual artist, like someone looks at it. So I think I believe that as well. So I thought, oh, it'd be nice to have one book because then it completes my process of art making. So I didn't really think beyond that. And I tend not to think beyond what, like, I look down at my 2 feet every day and kind of pretty much leave my eyes there. Just, I can't think that. I don't think like that, if that makes sense. I mean, you never in your dreams would think that you would have a book. I couldn't believe it. And when I first started writing, there weren't a lot of people writing poems that looked like me. And this was a long time ago. When I was in college, it was in the late 80s. And so I think I could really point to one or two Asian American people that were writing, or I should rephrase that, there are many that were writing, but the work wasn't really out there. And so I just couldn't imagine even having a book. So for me, it was extra special in that way and really surprising. That was my second book of poems, Salvinia Molesta, and I was still sort of just trying to learn how to be a writer. And so I was just writing poems and not really thinking about the book as object and as a whole. And so again, I had to go through that process and try and find something that threaded all of these sections together. And when I kind of laid all the poems out on the floor, which poets do that a lot, and I kind of realized that, oh, there's a kind of this thread of sort of sinister evil going through the book. And then I was kind of in a space where I was thinking about weeds and then read about Salvinia molesta. And I thought, oh, that could be a good sort of thing to sort of tie everything together. The weed kind of like doubles and, within a short period of time and ends up taking over an entire body of water. And so it's just a really fast moving and fast growing, sinister kind of weed, and it fit some of the things that I was grappling with and exploring. And like I remember the third section being about sort of corporate greed, and so it fit that area really well. And so I think the first section was more historical, and I kind of write a lot of poems about the Communist Party in China during that certain time period during the Cultural Revolution and things like that. So some of those are somewhat imaginary autobiographical poems related to my family.
Now, how would your research process for a project like this work? Is it a blend of stories you've heard from relatives and the vast available archives on these periods in history, fusing with whatever your imagination's inspired by at the time and the way they come out on the page?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just heard little snippets of stories here and there, that I had a great uncle that was killed or had to sit on stage during the Cultural Revolution with a sign around his neck, stuff like that. And then I was also studying East Asian studies in undergraduate and in graduate school. So I kind of married those two together.
The Huffington Post would later declare, after reading The Boss, that Victoria Chang is a poet to watch because her verse dares to encounter what too many poets either ignore or altogether fail to understand: the self-imprisonment attendant upon regularized labor. These are musical, imagistically arresting, and rigorously intelligent poems. But you should read them as much for their superlative treatment of the much maligned great theme as for any of the surface pleasures they unquestionably put on offer. Very highly recommended. Please talk about all that was at work within creating this 2014 winner for the PEN USA Award for Poetry.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I had started, when you're just starting off writing and making things, whatever kind of artist that you are, I think there's a degree of mimicking what other people are doing and just trying while you're learning the craft of whatever you're doing, because there is a craft to everything. And I think that third book is when I started kind of, I feel like looking back on it, coming more into my own. And then drawing a little bit more on my own personal life experiences, which, at that time I had a really awful boss in the workplace, and I really didn't like her. She was really mean, and but in a passive sort of aggressive way. We've all had those experiences, I'm sure. And then 9/11 happened, and my father also had a stroke. And so all of those three experiences came together in this kind of very sonic um, collection. And I was playing around and trying to learn how to use sound a little bit more in my own poetry. And somehow that all came together to become The Boss. We have so many tools to use in our poems. And what one of the things, I think I naturally am in between genres. So I think I'm a very, I think I write prosy poetry, and I write, poetic prose. And so I think I don't fall into those traditional categories as well. And so when I'm writing poems, I'm very aware of the fact that I sometimes naturally tend toward kind of like this prosy poem. And so I have to work hard to work on sound. It doesn't come as naturally to me. I think I'm more naturally an image poet. So I think in images and pictures, that kind of thing. And sonically, I just am not as natural. And so I have to work a little harder at it. And so I think that was also an experimentation. And okay, let me focus my energy and see if I can actually have fun with language. And once I started open that sort of box, I was really excited. It was very fun to write.
You would expand your reading audience to include young adult readers within the pages of Is Mommy and later Love Love, where the School Library Journal praised your work as thoughtful, heartbreaking, and honest, while Kirkus Reviews added their applause for a thoughtful book of poetry that provides a glimpse at life in an immigrant family. And part of the power of this collection came with your collaboration with illustrator Marla Frazee. Would you describe for fans of these works a bit about how you two worked back and forth as you were creating these collections? Would you, for instance, write and then she illustrate? Or would she ever create images you then respond to in a written poem?
Yeah, no, I started writing children's books and things just for fun because I had children that were really young and I was constantly reading to them. And I thought, oh, this is fun. I'll just try and write some picture books or picture book manuscripts. They're not books until they come out. And so I just thought I would try writing some children's things because it was constantly, my life. And so with children's books and pictures books, I mean, with illustrations involved, typically, if you're not an illustrator yourself, you send your manuscript in, and if it gets accepted, the publisher decides who to pair you with. And so in this case, I didn't know Marla Frazee, and the editor at Beach Lane Books, Simon Schuster, obviously works with Marla, and so paired me with Marla, and Marla was actually the one who was excited about that sort of subversive manuscript and wanted to illustrate it. But it took her, I think, 7 years to think of how. And so that's how that came about. I just decided to have children, but then also really cool things happened, and that they started appearing a lot in my work, and they kind of made me more interesting, I think, as a person and broader as an artist. I'm not at all suggesting that one needs to be a parent. I think I would have been just a fine artist without children, if that makes sense. I would just have been a different person, a different poet. And so for me, I felt like, oh, now I have to fight for my time. And that sort of angst actually appeared in a lot of my work too. So I think I became more angsty, and I started valuing my time a lot more, if that makes sense.
The Academy of American Poets, as many were wildly impressed after reading your next collection of works, Barbie Chang, where they predicted that your readers won't be the only ones who like this new work. And not even they will expect the poet's grander scope, her greater nuance, and her more generous attention to its characters' adult lives. Chang's punctuation-free lines, like W.S. Merwin's, invite overlapping readings and multiple syntax. Her pathos slows down for jokes, apricot, and hyper-contemporary puns. Such invitations are hard to resist, and they ring. While the Los Angeles Review of Books was so moved as to assert that Barbie Chang startles us into awareness. Chang's star is rising, and lucky for us, she writes with compassion, grace, and a true ethical sensibility. Please walk the viewer through how the rhythm of your wordsmithing works as you're living inside one of these poems during its creation.
I mean, rhythm, and as you know, in songwriting, rhythm and sound and sonic elements are so important to language. And we only have 26 letters, right? We have 26 letters, and it's miraculous to me that we can put them together in brand new ways. And a lot of the reasons why are like all the things that we study in about poetry, but at a very young age it was having to memorize Emily Dickinson. It's like, think about it: because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. And so you just like start to sort of think about rhythms in your head, and things are knocking around. Letters are literally knocking around in your brain. And I think that the more we pay attention to, the sonic elements, the rhythmic elements, the imagistic elements, and all of those wonderful things that make language sing, I think the better whatever it is we're using language for will sing, if that makes sense. Totally. I mean, I found a storage, like we opened a storage thing of my parents, and I was like, oh wow, look at all these cool boxes. And now I know the names of all these people, like my grandmother, my grandfather, like things, as immigrants kid, you don't know any of this stuff because they're all who knows where. And then so it was exciting to find all those boxes. But then I started feeling like, oh my gosh, I have more questions to ask, but then there wasn't anyone to ask. And then I started writing these letters to my mother, these epistolary things, and then it became, that book, Dear Memory. We all have so many secrets in our families that we just don't have any idea about because we only live so long and it's a short time period. But yeah, I learned that my grandfather, so my father's father, had had another kid and was married before he married my grandmother. And but his first wife died, and I saw the name of this person, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's something I had never known. And then another thing I learned was my father, he worked at Ford Motor Company as an engineer. He had all these letters in those boxes where he had perfect attendance for many years in a row. And I was like, wow, first of all, that's a different time because like attendance, but second of all, I was like, oh my gosh, what was I doing at that time period? Not thinking about my father working hard and having perfect attendance, which is, the state of a selfish child. And I think I understood at that moment what it means to be a parent and to make all the sacrifices for your children. And I felt so heartwarmed by that. And then also kind of sad, but knowing that that's just how kids are.
Now, we understand you were playing with wakas within your next collection, The Trees Witness Everything, where the New York Public Library admired all you'd accomplished while working within the formal constraints of traditional Japanese poetry, writing of aging, nature, love, death, and violence with an austere emotionality, creating stark beauty from simplicity, while electric literature found that what emerges is an appreciation for the wildness of the mind, the freedom of a wandering mind and memory. What first intrigued you about the Japanese syllabic form that you were creating with here?
Yeah, I mean, they're just syllable counting, and everyone knows what a haiku is. And I wanted to just get out of my own way. And so I thought I'm gonna try and put some really strong restrictions on my writing so I don't like myself and my own brain doesn't kind of get stuck in and push the language into ways that are preconceived. And so I gave myself restrictions. I'd write these short poems that were all in syllables based on traditional Japanese waka syllable counts. And then I also made the titles all inspired or taken directly from W.S. Merwin's poem titles. And so I had those two big bowling bumpers. I had a lot of restrictions, and then I was sitting and writing and counting syllables. And then if the syllables didn't fit, I would have to get rid of the whole line and then sometimes go up many lines. And so I never was able to get too wed to the lines that I was writing. And I have to say, it was just a fun thing to do after a book like Obit kind of happened. And the reaction to Obit was so powerful. I was like, oh, I just wanted to just play around a little bit with language.
The Today Show would spotlight your next release as a poignant, powerful poetry collection that uses the work of American abstract painter Agnes Martin to tackle themes of grief, loss, the loneliness of the human experience, yet also the hopefulness of the human experience as well. You'll find yourself underlying so many of Chang's beautiful verses, along with quietly smiling at her wit. Did you discover this painter's work while walking through a museum exhibit and find yourself so inspired by her work that your imagination immediately began responding with words in what became With My World in My Back poems?
Agnes Martin wrote and also painted and made things. And so I had read her writings first and kind of just like lightly looked at her visual art many years ago. But I didn't really connect with the visual art as much at that time, but I really liked the writings. And then it wasn't until the MoMA in New York asked me to write a poem on anything in their entire collection of visual art online that I, was dutiful and started looking online and searching and looking around. It just was too overwhelming. So then I went backwards and I thought, hey, like what artist feels like I want to learn more about? And so I thought of Agnes Martin. And then lo and behold, they had some pieces there in the online collection that I was able to write a poem on. So I wrote a poem, and then at some point I stopped, but then I read that poem aloud at a writing conference, and I sat down. I thought, you know what, given all the difficulties that I'm dealing with right now, her work really resonates with me in ways that it just didn't when I was younger. And so I just wrote another poem, and then I wrote another poem, and then I started ordering everything I could for her books and doing as much research as possible. And then that's how this book came about. One of her favorite pieces of mine that I enjoy the most is called Friendship. And it's the last poem in the book. It's called Friendship 1963. I also really love Nightsea 1963, which are both pieces that I've seen in person subsequently or around the time that I was writing them. And so I've luckily kind of just run into some of her pieces at small museums too. And then I have plates, really beautiful plates in the books that I ordered and then you can look at them online. But I just think her work really resonated with me because I was feeling really depressed during this time period where my father was sort of on his last leg. Didn't know it at the time, but I sort of maybe intuitively knew it. And then I was also dealing with a lot of other stuff. And so her work just at that moment felt really appropriate for some of the feelings that I was having. With my back to the world, 1997. This year, I turned my back to the world. I let language face the front. The parting felt like a death. The first person ran away like a horse. When the first person left, there was no second or third person as I had originally thought. All that remained was repetition and blue things. This year, I stopped shaking the rain off of umbrellas and nothing bad happened. The terror of this year was emptiness, but I learned that it's possible for a sentence to have no words, that the meaning of a word can exist without the word, that life can still occur without a mind, that emptiness still swarms without the world, that it can be disconnected from the wall and still light up. The best thing about emptiness is if you close your eyes in a field, you'll open your eyes in a field.
Now, what's your advice for aspiring authors in any genre on how to handle success and its expectations once you begin to have some? We'd imagine part of the answer is to shut it out creatively at all times.
Totally. And then people have they have expectations, and then the better in other people's minds that you do, the more also you can be a target for criticism, which can also feel a little bit stingy sometimes. But you just have to just put your head down and have conviction for whatever it is that you want to do. If you want to keep writing about grief, then keep writing about grief. If people think you're stuck in it, then so let them think you're stuck in it. And it's like you just do what you do, and do you have to have conviction, and you have to stick to your vision, whatever that might be as an artist. Otherwise, there's this kind of manufactured unsincere aspect or insincere aspect of art that I think people can see right through. You know, we put a lot as artists into ourselves into the world, and you can't, I mean, sometimes people just don't understand it or they don't like it, and that's totally fine. You just have to accept that as a part of one of the perils of being an artist.
Beyond that, what other words of wisdom do you have for writers on the rise about how to smartly navigate the waters of a career making a living where people are literally paying a price to read your words when they can pick up any new book off the shelves?
Humility, because I think a lot of us start going into something new thinking, oh, that's what I want to do, and it looks easy. But I ultimately think that having humility and realizing how much you don't know has kept me nimble and on my toes as a poet and artist. There's so much to learn, and there's so much to read, and there are people doing amazing work, and so I just devour as much of it as I can. And I'm very horizontal. Like, I like to read all different things. I like philosophy. I like reading nonfiction. I like looking at visual art. I like listening to music. So I just think it's all related, and genres are just kind of human formed. And I think to be an artist means just to stay alive with your ears really popped forward and really wide open.
When you wake up these days and sit down to work on a new poem, what do you still find most electrifying about the creative process with whatever words are at play in your mind?
I was just doing that this morning. I was working right before I came on with you. I was looking at some of my poems and thinking to myself, oh, I'm not necessarily straight rhyming. Sometimes I am, but I'm actually like working with assonance, consonants, I'm so slant rhyming and things like that. So I'm thinking a lot about those things all the time. I mean, sometimes the flat line is important. I think their subject matter, like Obit, that book, those were prose poems, but it doesn't mean that within the language there's not some sonic elements going on. But I did really try to make that language, I think, diction wise, like just very sort of rhythmically, just flat. And so this other thing that I'm working on, there are some smaller poems in there, and I feel like that rhyming and consonants and assonants. Those things are important to the poems. And so I'm trying to put some more of that sonic stuff in. And also it just, when you start thinking like that, you come up with a surprising word that you wouldn't have used otherwise, as you know, and that makes the thing really interesting and surprising. And if it's like all my job in this world is, not to sit around and win awards, to go back to our conversation before, but it's to surprise myself. That's the joy of writing.
Victoria, it has been a pleasure talking today. Thank you so much for taking out time to be on About the Authors TV.
It was nice chatting. You take care.